We've got a full panel here. Thank you, guys. I'm going to ask for you to start on your end, introduce yourselves, give a couple of words about who you are, what you do, and where you do it for. We do have some mics that we'll have to share, so just to be cognizant of that. And then we're going to have a lively conversation about the carrier conundrum. Dun, dun, dun.
Good morning. I'm Kurt Jacobs. I'm with JMA Wireless. We do DAS systems and all kinds of wireless connectivity. I focus on some of our emerging technologies, in particular the Internet of Things, or as I call it, and some people have termed it the Internet of Transformation, because it's not just about things, it's also about the people that are connected to those environments and changing the way people are doing business.
Good morning. My name is Dave Sampat. I'm with AT&T. I'm the Regional Network Planning Manager for the Northeast region. Primarily, my duties are to work with all the individual RAN markets in the Northeast region for AT&T in terms of their prioritization for in-building needs, working with the national teams on our national budgets in terms of what we want to add to our build plans for each year, coming up with creative solutions for low-cost solutions or alternative solutions that we have, and basically just working with the teams to figure out what's the best way and most effective way to get an in-building system where they want it, where it's important for them based on what they know about the macro network and their needs on the in-building network.
Thank you.
Ezra Hug, Director of Strategic Partnerships at BOINGO Wireless. I primarily handle the AT&T account nationally, having been an AT&T employee. Now I'm on the other side of the fence. And I also handle some relationships regionally in the New York City area.
Great. And I'm Jim Whalen. I'm a Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Boston Properties. We're in 5 markets, not just Boston, but here in New York and DC, San Francisco, and LA. And oversee basically our just technology stack, connectivity. We've done over 30 million square feet of DAS coverage in our spaces around the country, just partnering with a number of carriers.
Excellent.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicholas Stello. I'm a Senior Vice President with Vornado Realty Trust. I run the infrastructure department, or side of IT. Vornado, as well as probably over 30 million square feet of space that's covered by indoor cellular. We've been doing this for about 10 years. We have great partnerships with the carriers. In the position, most of the responsibility now the position that I'm in has actually turned into creating more asset value through technology, which has been a 180-degree turn for IT as a typical expense. We've brought a lot of different things to our portfolio, which has gotten some good PR internally, which is always helpful.
Good PR is always helpful. So we're here talking about some of the drivers of who pays for what, where, when, why, and how. We have a lot of infrastructure needs that are still being developed and built out. And it's a conversation we've always had. Where does the burden of that infrastructure cost lie? Maybe we'll start with our AT&T panelists here. Since, the history of those costs, I think, really started with the carriers. And so maybe if we started a little bit with that foundation and maybe some of the drivers of those changes, that would be helpful.
Sure, absolutely. And that's ancient history for me at this point. So all the carriers, when DAS became obviously something that became more normal and an expectation in venues, would scramble. It was kind of a land grab, right? You would want to be that lead carrier. You want to make sure that you had those tier 1 venues covered. So we would go and get the rights to build the neutral host system. AT&T created a special group within the company that I'm a part of. They kind of changed focus over the last couple of years, but we went after these tier 1 venues because it's always good to be able to control the assets in that venue, whether it's to do an upgrade to an LTE or add additional carriers or whatnot. Over the years, and the landscape has changed, as Ilissa mentioned, right? So a lot of those tier one venues are completed. We're doing upgrades still and whatnot, but now we're talking about the tier two, and the economics have changed big time for the carriers, right? These systems are extremely expensive, as everyone knows, and ROI, the return on investment, is becoming a key focus, and that's something that I do as part of my daily job. I look at that. Are we going to earn revenue? We have to make money on these things, right? It's not just a coverage play. Is it worth getting that RF into that venue? Is it worth having that coverage or capacity, pleasing the customers at that location? So if we're talking about an airport or a stadium or a larger venue, certainly we're going to have a lot more impact than a tier two or tier three venue, right? So for those, now we want the venue to pay for that, right? We want the building owners to come prepared to say, we have a DAS, we're not going to charge you to join it, but we would want you to provide the RF source, which would still be our burden of cost, right? There are some models where actually venues are actually paying for our RF source, which is fantastic from my perspective. But even with that, if it's a BTS only or some sort of RF source attachment, that's what we're starting to see the shift in the industry, and we want to get that message out. And it's not just an AT&T message; it's all carriers. Verizon's in the same boat. T-Mobile, Sprint. I'm sure capital is limited, budgets are shrinking. You know, how can we get on systems to please our customers as well as the venue's customers?
Exactly. And I think, you know, we've got Nicholas here and Jim, you know, who are more on the property side. So it would be great to get your perspective of this, because now that the burden of, you know, the shift of the burden is more put on you guys, how can you justify this?
Well, it's a definite shift. And we started at Vornado Realty about 10 years ago. And at that time, you know, you're right, the systems are still expensive. They were expensive back then. The means for lighting up the office buildings that we have primarily in New York City was to offload the macro, okay? And if you did enough of them, you know, the macro was overburdened, and if we can take a large number of large buildings in a highly populated area, it would help the macro. Honestly, I didn't really care. All I did care about was AT&T and Verizon coming to my door and installing their services, which have been fantastic, and slowly turning what was once looked at as an amenity to a requirement. Now, that has been past history. We're up against a different type of environment today, and I was talking to Jim in the side saying, if we started today, how difficult would it be to get funding for this? Okay, you know, IT now is part of leasing and part of development. That's not happened before, and these implementations have really brought to the forefront, again, that good PR of having us be part of, you know, leasing arrangements and things like that. So I think in the Vornado side of things, since we have a track record of it, the business side of Vornado, not the IT side, can appreciate what it can bring to a building. They'd be more open to perhaps looking at funding in some way, shape, or form in order to get some large customers into our properties. That's not been historically what we've been doing, but that's the trend, and they've been absolutely more open to it. We've done some things with some carriers to make it easier for them to come into some of our buildings. So it's starting to turn.
And I would just add that, you know, every case, every building has got a different, it's almost a different case study, business case, the way you look at it. And I personally think the model needs to be creatively challenged, and we've been actually contributing to some extensions of in some of our locations. But I would love to see, there's really three parties here. There's the owner, there's the carrier, and there's the tenant, the customer, the consumer at the ultimate end. And I think all three of them have to participate in the model. I'm just in an office, I'm primarily office, I have to kind of look at it. And I think we need to be creatively coming to the table together. I'm not sure that dynamic is actually occurring. Being really thinking out of the box and thinking about specific kind of models that actually will work economically with everyone having a piece in the pie here. So again, I think the times are changing, Nick. I totally, they have, but I think the creativity on really trying to model this and make this work needs to be, we all need to come to the table. So, and that, again, I think that's an opportunity, let's put it that way.
And towards Jim's point, we've had a few properties that a large tenant wanted cellular coverage. And I worked with a tenant representative to contact the carrier on collectively our behalf to start a conversation. And then I could try to shoehorn that to get the rest of the building lit, but it is not just a landlord to carrier or third party. I think depending on what the property is and what the needs are, there are a number of different parties involved.
Yeah. Is it now common that you're looking at these solutions as utilities for your buildings, or have we not yet made that shift?
It's a utility. It's, so you just think about it, you bring it in like water, and it's in the riser, and then you're tapping into it. So whenever there's again, construction event or a redo of a space, you should be, the customer wants to tap that utility just like they do with electricity and water, and that's the way we view it.
And from a third-party perspective, we see ourselves as a liaison between our customers. We have, they're customers and service providers, obviously. So AT&T, service provider, their customers are you and I and everyone else. The venues are also service providers, but they've got corporate customers that they've got to keep happy, and our customers are obviously both sides of the venue and the carriers. So we see our position as, do you want to have an HVAC company that, goes in and builds and monitors your HVAC? Probably not. You probably want to sub it out. So we see our position as one, whether it's licensed or unlicensed frequency, we can come in, fund, design, own and operate a system that's neutral, whether it's, DAS, small cell, Wi-Fi, whatever. And in doing so, we all share the cost together. We will, monitor and maintain the system so that, our customers don't have to worry about it so much. They know that we're going to adhere to, to the quality standards and the KPIs that are expected. And so we see it very much as a marriage, and it's becoming more. It feels like it's becoming more of sort of a three-prong type of balanced approach, whereas before it was, hey, carrier, you're going to pay for everything, or hey, swinging that direction. The other direction, hey, venue, you've got to bear all the costs. Well, that's not, it's got to be a little bit of a dance.
Who pays for your services?
Who pays for our services? Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the model that's emerging. I mean, it's we think it's going to be a shared cost between the carriers and the venues. I mean, in some cases, the carriers may be able to have a competitive advantage in buying, let's just say small cell gear from whatever OEM. So we may be able to take advantage of pricing there. And then on the venue side, the venue may be doing a deep retrofit of the building. And so they're going through all the risers and cleaning them up. And they may be pulling cables. And so we might say, hey, venue, could you help us out with pulling the cables? And so we could dramatically drive down the capital cost of it. And then there's going to be a nominal reoccurring, for monitoring and maintenance and alarming and response and all that. But I think the model it's got to come down to a more reasonable price point. But hopefully, as a result of that, you're going to have, instead of 10, 15 buildings being built out in an area, you're going to have 100 or 1,000. Because in New York City, 75, 8,000 high rises. Okay, not all of those need in-building systems, but if 20% of them do, do the math. It's 1,500, and there are probably only 150, maybe in the city right now that actually have them. So,
yeah.
Not to be left out, but I think there's a fourth party, which is the equipment provider. So I'll be up here representing that. Is that we have a responsibility and role in this too. I think to one, get evolve the technology and that it's scalable, and whether it's from small size, medium, so you can get to better price points. Support the new services, particularly in the areas of Internet of Things. As more things are connected, the value of the utility goes up. And we need to, and we're aggressively doing that, adding that, so you can get more value in your tenants, and it can be a differentiator for you. And also make it easier for folks like AT&T to be able to deploy, or yourselves to deploy and install this and reduce the overall infrastructure costs. So that's something that manufacturers we're taking very seriously, because there are competitive choices out there in connectivity. So that's on us.
Yeah, and just to touch on, I mean, I'm really excited to hear that, property owners or property managers know that this is a utility going for it. Not everybody knows this yet, right? There's a lot of smaller players that don't subscribe to that level of thinking, and they're shocked when they say, we want a system, but you pay for it. They're asking the carrier to pay for it, and we say, no, you put in a system, work with third parties or work with whomever, work with the the OEM, and then we'll join it. We'll provide the RF source, which is a cost to us too, and it boggles their mind. And we use that analogy of you have utilities in your house or wherever, right? I built a house 3 years ago. I had to pay to run my electric lines and my coax lines for cable and my plumbing. I didn't ask the companies I pay for those services to install it in my house, right? So same thing. Right now, existing venues, it's tough because you now have to go in the ceilings and run wires and whatnot, but that's not the cost we want to bear the brunt of. So that's just a message that needs to be more and more widespread, that it's now a utility. It's an expectation to your tenant or your customers or whomever is in that location that you have cellular service, high-speed networks.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't recoup the cost if someone else is, building the infrastructure inside the building.
Exactly.
And, I guess, a lot of the pushback that we get is also, on the equipment providers, right? It's expensive, it doesn't necessarily solve all the problems. You have to get, this piece to do that and that one to do the other. So how are you helping the marketplace adapt better and enabling them to install solutions more effectively?
Yeah, well, I think your keynote this morning really highlighted the direction of the technology, and it is moving there. There are huge investments being made in the standards and in the technology to support more things. But up to now, DAS has been kind of a one-trick pony, which is supporting mobile phones. And it's usually other people's mobile phones coming into your building, so you're providing this free service. As we expand the utility, and I guess to overuse that term, of the infrastructure to support other things and transform businesses, more things are going to get connected. And DAS and the cellular is very secure. There's a very mature business model. Price points are coming down, and you'll be able to just do a lot more with it. So I was mentioning to some of the gentlemen before that soon their tenants will be bringing in a lot of devices and things, or maybe their infrastructure for HVAC systems will be connected through the cellular network to be monitored by GE or whoever to monitor that equipment. That's something that should be known ahead of time, and they can, as you said, you're starting to negotiate IT and the utility as part of the lease. Hey, understanding what are those customers bringing in? And usually in those IoT use cases, the mobile phone is also part of the equation. You don't get the value out of the things, you don't transform until you start connecting your devices, so it starts ratcheting up the value of the system.
Well, you mentioned something interesting as DAS being the one-trick pony. Evolution requires change, and new, developments and new technology is needed. So, what are some of those new trends that we should be looking out for? If the one-trick pony, is it enough? Is it still enough? Is it not enough yet?
I'm just shocked that we're still dealing with coax cable. I'm sorry. As a CIO, I deal with the shifting technologies, and there's just screaming fast change and enabled by cloud and mobile and all this other stuff going on, and then we're still dealing with this huge head-end space, and it just is mind-boggling. And I just had expected the tipping point would have been a year ago, 2 years ago, and it's still like we're still talking about when the tipping point's going to occur. So it's more out of frustration and looking at the space and saying that there hasn't been a cost-effective change in Kurt, you're talking about like the value prop of, okay, we're going to build this larger fiber plant, we're going to put more on, and that's going to be the value, but it'll still be a high price point versus lowering the price point and enable, so it's again this conundrum and dynamic that I don't know how that plays out.
Yeah,
right?
I think we have to do both, and we're doing that. And then there's things like network virtualization and so forth that are going to start as that works its way into the infrastructure. We'll start lowering costs, provide more flexibility in how you deploy the system. So I agree with you. We want to maintain the value and also bring the infrastructure.
We started doing looking into seriously converged networks. It's not a one-trick pony anymore. Mm-hmm. So we have a system that can do more than a distributed antenna system. It's primarily fiber, but we are now more concerned about cost and things like that, again, years ago we didn't care as much. We didn't want the carriers to just go and spend their money foolishly because we wanted another property and another property. But now when we're looking at the bottom line from our development team or leasing team or whomever, we are definitely looking for things. You're talking about new technology, Spider Cloud and things like that. We're looking at trying to achieve the same coverage for less money and economies of scale with a converged network that can do BMS and security and lots of other things in addition to distributed antenna systems.
What about security? So we've talked about, being able to provide the RF source. We've talked about getting the equipment and then, making sure that your infrastructure within your building is able to support the communications. But we need services on top of that, right, Ezra? I mean, you need, security. You need to be able to monitor, manage, and adapt, especially as everybody is expecting, the communication platform to adapt to their needs. So, how is that being overlaid into these systems, and who pays for that?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, when it comes to security, I mean, certainly that's, as a third party, we make sure that our networks are, depending on whether you're talking about licensed or unlicensed. On the licensed side, the carriers, I mean, I'll let Dave handle the carrier side in terms of security, but I mean, you put a padlock on it? Oh, that's good. On the Wi-Fi side, I mean, one of the products we offer is PassPoint Wi-Fi offload, which is a secure. It's a VPN secure carrier grade way to offer data offload as well as Wi-Fi calling as well as a number of other. I mean, other companies offer it. We do it better than anyone, but it's very secure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you think about on the carrier side?
I mean, obviously security is a huge part of AT&T's portfolio, right? When it comes to wireless networks, it's obviously a secure network. We obviously have systems in place to monitor and make sure everything is secure, but it's really not my wheelhouse, so I don't know enough to get into the detail, but maybe Kurt has something to say about that.
I'll just kind of comment. I mean, I just, the challenge for, Nick and I, let's say we're building Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, right? That building is got a converged network running all its systems. It'll probably have 600 endpoints in the building, all at an end of an Ethernet cable, right? That's the reality of how, our building profiles that we manage, not only existing buildings, but newer buildings, and the layering of technology that's coming into these buildings, and the sophistication, and some of them are even cloud-enabled to run our buildings. So security is like, you've got thousands of people in that building every day, and you can't have a disruptive event, that's going to affect the occupancy of that building. So, again, our industry is and I don't know what inning we're in, but we're, some of us are more proactive at how we segment, how we monitor, how we develop rules again between these systems, because there's some fundamental risk profiles that, again, reputational risk for our company that you got to protect. So again, this whole blending of IoT and how that becomes secure, Kurt, is going to be a very important conversation that has to be worked out as well, right? So.
We're having one. We are on a panel where we're trying to work directly with some of the manufacturers of some of these products to have standards for security and things like that. And we just met several weeks ago in Chicago. So there's a group of real estate companies, financial companies, all universities, correct, all share the same issue. A lot of the endpoints, 600, well over 1,000 at One Penn Plaza, New York City. If we can get together and share our concerns with the manufacturers, we're hoping we can get them to take seriously some of our concerns and embed some more security into their products right from the get-go.
Yeah, and that's important too. I mean, when we talk about, where does the cost for these systems lie? Who's driving the technology? Are the carriers driving technology? Are the customers driving technology? Or are the OEMs driving the technology?
Oh, it's definitely iterative. We're not going to do things that somebody isn't going to buy. And a lot of times people in commercial real estate, you're so busy doing things, you're not looking necessarily at all the technology, so we share our ideas. AT&T and other providers have strategic plans that we're trying to fit into and infrastructure, and there's a lot of chicken and egg going on. On the security part, I think that really highlights a great point in this industry with these emerging technologies, that it's not going that fast. You saw some of the dates. There's progress being made, there's a timeline, a roadmap, but to get things certified and validated with the carriers, you're not going to let us connect a DAS system to your network you don't feel is safe and secure in investment. There's a lot of other technology out there, and people are bringing stuff into buildings that you have no idea. Someone talked about, an HVAC system going on, and people are, hooking up private networks and things that you have no idea what's being connected. So I think there's this industry is taking really serious how we approach that and doing it very deliberately, so it is secure. And you pay a little bit more for that, but I think in the long run, that's a good investment.
So have there been any creative solutions to financing some of these projects and initiatives that we should be aware of, or are there not enough creative solutions to funding these projects?
I know from the carrier perspective, right? We evaluate projects a couple different ways. One is more of an enterprise model, and then one is more of a public model, right? So a lot of unique circumstances, but basically if you can walk into that venue, it's considered public, and if you or I can't walk into that venue or go wherever we want, it's considered private. So if it's a private location, right, then we have more of an enterprise model, and we expect a customer or the tenants to contribute to a system in that location because it's not serving anyone else other than those folks, right? So in that case, we look for funding. Now, even with that, doesn't mean we're going to do it, right? How many lines are in that venue? How many will they re-up their contracts? That comes into play, right? Now, if it's a public location, we're kind of stuck. We're not. We would love if the landlord would do it, but you have sports stadiums, for example. They're not paying for it unless they want to own it and really make profit from it. And some owners are doing that. But we've creatively come up with ways where it's a mixed-use location where we contribute some of the capital towards the build, and then we retain ownership of the asset, and the landlord pays for or the venue manager will contribute to that system and allow AT&T to then own those assets. And they don't want to have it to do with, they don't want anything to do with the system. They just want a system in place. So they'll say, we'll pay for it, but we can only afford X. We'll fill in the gap in some cases. So it's getting better compared to years past when this all kind of started, but it's still not to the final point where we can just say, here are the ground rules. This is what you want, we want out of an owner or a landlord when we go to each venue. Every venue is unique.
So how are venues, if they take ownership of the infrastructure and, the gear, how are they able to make money?
Well, I think these guys could probably talk to it better than I can, but for me, it's a value to the tenant space,
yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. We look at it as we've done from day one, marketing and leasing, and more when a prospective tenant comes into our property, they'll have their smartphone and walk around and see what kind of coverage they have. That's been basically an accepted part of the leasing process. And now we're navigating, new waters. Again, AT&T and Verizon and like really aren't coming up and saying, okay, we'd like to do One Penn Plaza. It's 2.5 million square feet, $6, $7, $5 million, what have you. Those days are really over right now. We are trying to leverage our relationship with the carriers and have a mutual interest for both of us to see what can work. Again, we look at it as having the tenants have a say in this as well. What will tomorrow bring? Will that be, a cost to the tenant? I don't know yet, but I know that we can't continue the way we're going right now.
Yeah, and I would just, we have focused on our CBD, so saying that, in the city of Boston, all our buildings are lit. We can say that, right? And that's a differentiator just from a leasing perspective, and not just it's a variable. It's not a primary variable. It's in the stack of variables. But I will say that we're starting to be creative on I got the next round of buildings. We're still signing deals. I just stood one up yesterday, and we're contributing some money to certain deals. Some deals are we're doing Spider Cloud, recognizing it's a single carrier, but it's in the suburbs, and I need to get some coverage, and I don't care, right? I'm working with BOINGO on a project, so you have to be creative with each profile building that you're working with, and so it's but I wish there were more creativity. So let's put it that way. So.
I mean, do your tenants really understand that? I mean, these systems cost money. It enables them to do business, and so are they willing to pay for it?
Well, the thing about it is that so the way these or at least our deal is structured on all the builds that we've done is the carrier comes in and does the initial build, but any subsequent events, any movement of an AP or any tenant TI or redo of a space, it becomes a tenant burden, right? It becomes part of the TI cost. Mm-hmm. So that model is already there for subsequent events. It's really like, how can we build that in the front end where there's, and the adoption may be over time, but the utility's in the building, it's built, and then it may take time to get it deployed onto the floors, but there's a model here that will work, in my mind. So,
we have a similar arrangement. If we will install it with the carriers, and if there's major changes, redemising, things like that the tenant is doing, they will pick it up. But we did have an issue about a year or two ago at One Penn Plaza. It was a tenant that's been there for quite a long time. We put in indoor cellular, and it didn't work for a little bit, and they were screaming, absolutely screaming. And I guess from my side, I wanted to ask them how much they're paying for it, but from their side, hey, we're paying you guys a lot of money in rent, and this was, so I understand, but it's a difficult, at times it's a difficult thing to provide when it's a somewhat complicated build-out in property, and the tenants, again, they're used to something, and they do pay a lot of money, I'm sure, for both of the properties that they're in, for Boston and Vornado, and you try to work with the carriers as quickly as possible, but I think going forward that'll change.
Yeah.
Then just talking about innovation, I mean, just to give you an example of some new innovations on the small cell front, we're working with some retailers nationally that require coverage and capacity in their retail stores, and so in some cases we're finding that retailers are willing to contribute up to 100% to offer ubiquitous, high-quality service to their customers. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine applications that could apply to. So especially on the small cell side, more affordable, doesn't require a base station, requires a simple interconnect, 4-page interconnect agreement, with the carrier, and and the build-out cost from the retailer standpoint is pretty nominal. Mm-hmm. So in that case, everyone's happy. I mean, I'd love to see that kind of model spread.
Absolutely. So do we have any questions from our audience participants here? Would love for you to help join the conversation, or maybe you have some other creative solutions that you want to share with us all here today. on how we could fund some of these projects. Yeah.
Hi, Jim O'Gorman, Communications Engineering. I know a couple of you guys up on the stage. A quick question on, you talked about security, but I didn't hear anything on public safety. And that's a real driver in some of the DAS solutions that I've been working on. Could we get some of your thoughts on how you're addressing public safety today?
Yeah, thanks for that question, because that was on my list to make sure I included, and I didn't. That's a value that it's a hard requirement, and I think a lot of tenants don't maybe understand that, that there's a public safety requirement. There's a lot of rules changing, and they vary by municipality. The good part is that we can integrate that, natively into the system. There's so many things in the license spectrum. We're now able to do IoT, the public safety on the same infrastructure, so it increases the value. Yeah, it's absolutely important.
Right. Historically, for us, it's been separate systems, but with some new developments in and around New York City, we're looking at more of a converged system for that.
It's been maintained as separate currently, and haven't broken down those walls.
We have another question over here.
Meanwhile, Dave, I'd love to know what ballpark you are. Is that an AT&T build, too, on your photo?
Citizens Bank Park, we did a DAS panel like 3 years ago. That's where that picture is from.
Nat Bargman,
Is AT&T.
AT&T. I'm curious, from a real estate perspective, I respect the fact that you look at wireless as a key differentiator, for your properties. As we move down to 5G, are your customers or your tenants now asking you about the use cases that would then differentiate your properties? Are you forward-looking to say, what are those types of things that are going to differentiate your properties?
I'd say we have not had that substantive conversation at all. Not even on my radar right now.
We're getting feedback. We're very active in the stadium and venue, and they're starting to really ask questions of what else they can get out of this utility. One of the first things they're asking is how do we measure? Right now, a lot of it is we just provide it, and as a utility, it's fairly immature. It's not like water and electricity. We know how to monitor it and provide it, and expectation. The connectivity, wireless connectivity is not at a point. You'll see things, and it's not really talked about in the 5G that much, but you'll see it in the next couple of years where we'll be able to actually manage it as a utility, and I think once we can measure it, then we can really put some value on it.
Yeah, and the comment I will add is that, we have been on this segmentation kick of just segmenting everything in our buildings, right? And this has been a 2-year journey, and it continues. And the amount of data that is, going over the Ethernet cable or the fiber cable in these buildings, is pretty significant. It's not, it's not insignificant. So I guess the only comment there is that there's an opportunity with just the data of running a building that will play itself out, but not that it's front and center, right?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, we've been talking up here about segmenting, where the costs are, right? You've got your equipment, you've got your RF, you've got, the wires, you've got the infrastructure. I mean, and if we figure out where all of those different pieces lie, and then, how you're being able to deliver them together, you can easily break up those costs amongst various providers and then pass through to your customers in order, to be able to pay for it.
And each venue type is different. The cost equation is completely different on a commercial building versus a healthcare location versus an airport versus a transit system. It totally changes. I look at that all the time when I get requests from my market teams or solicitations from existing DASs or third parties that want to build a DAS or have the rights to build a DAS. There are many locations where one would think have a high data usage that you really don't. And then there's others that definitely show a better ROI based on the investment because that's where people are streaming video and using their phone. Commercial buildings actually have very low data usage on the cellular network, believe it or not, because people are at their desks. People are using Wi-Fi, right? So to put in a DAS in a commercial building is a completely different cost equation than a stadium or like an airport.
Are there public tools available to help figure out, usage and costs and, all of that?
I don't know about public tools. We have internal tools,
Obviously.
but I could generalize it this way, right? Real quickly, I don't know how we are on time, but everybody who has a subscription plan, right? What are you paying for? You're paying for data, right? Back in the day, we paid for how many minutes a month we used and how many text messages we sent. That's no longer part of the equation. You're paying for data. I either have a few gigabytes or unlimited or whatever, right? So when we measure it, when we look at it, we're looking at data usage from a carrier perspective. Obviously we have an RF need too, but how much data is going to be used in that venue? So an airport, I see a lot more data usage with the tools we have and the studies we've done on existing DASs we've turned on air, just to give you an example, right? So airports have a better ROI. Commercial buildings, or let's just say a college football stadium, for those who are sports. A college football stadium does 6 games a year, sometimes 7. And they can cost $6, $7, $8 million.
Yeah.
Well, that's certainly not attractive for me anymore, but back in the day it may have, right? Because the demand is there. But now the tier 1 venues, as I mentioned earlier, are pretty much covered. Or we have macro solutions with multi-beam antennas that now do an adequate job that didn't exist a few years ago.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rich Berliner with Connected Real Estate Magazine. I wanted to ask Nick and Jim, and to an extent Ezra, what's the considerations do you go through when looking for who do you get to help you if there are issues in your buildings with communications? Who do you look to? How do you choose vendors to help you with this process? And what's the thoughts?
Yeah, so, I think Nick and I have been fortunate in that we've had direct relationships with the carriers in the last, 6, 7 years, 8 years. So it is a relationship game. You have to invest in your relationships in the space, and AT&T was a little easier. They've got some business, really good business relationships, and the central, Verizon is every region on its own, and you got to develop, totally different set of relationships in California than you do in Mid-Atlantic to Boston. But I think, again, the landscape is changing in that the third-party providers, and there's a number in the room here, are going to be, there's opportunities here. And so I don't know whether there's a formula or you look for, again, building a relationship. It's just like any other vendor that you have to work with. And, again, we're working with BOINGO on 1 or 2 properties. And, again, we'll see how it goes. But it's, I don't know if there's a secret formula. So
I would definitely agree with what Jim had just said. The way I look at it is we're open for business. If you're interested and it passes a number of, certain reviews in terms of physical stability and things like that, and it can benefit the tenants, it's going to benefit us. The way we set our agreements is that the carrier, there's a lead carrier that builds this, and they own it. So they are responsible for maintaining it and monitoring it and things like that. So on the carrier side, in terms of in-building cellular, we're very much joined at the hip. When it comes to other players, other vendors for communication, we have a process in which we'd like to wire up our entire portfolio with a said vendor, and we'd like to have more options for our tenants, and we're a little bit, we're looking at it from a selfish point that we want more things for the IT group and the Vornado people in that building as well, in addition to the tenants. But the tenants certainly come first.
Great. We have time for one more. He's coming. Jeff's coming.
Thank you. I guess this is directed more on the real estate folks and possibly BOINGO, since I know your history is in Wi-Fi. I'm hearing the various speakers talk about the carriers are getting out, or the funding available is diminishing, more of the burdens being put on the property owner. And at the same time, you want to provide the most valuable or the best experience for your tenants, your customers. But there are solutions now that don't need that coax and can not only have the Wi-Fi, the cellular, and the building management system running across the same infrastructure, but you can also connect IP devices. It could be a security camera, it could be a building automation system, and it's not there's more than one manufacturer. You probably had Corning in California. So the ability to retrofit a building or design something from the ground up is now much more affordable, and you're able to provide multiple services, not just a discrete cellular service. And the public safety, like we mentioned, that's becoming a very important thing. In New York City, I know they're in the process, the fire department are rewriting the building code for the next cycle. But right now, it's every building over 75 feet, every new building over 75 feet's got to have a public safety system. So I think that if you kind of think outside the box a little bit and look at the technology that's coming on board now, you'll see there are some better choices than the traditional systems that have been out there.
Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the conversation, gentlemen. Appreciate your time today. And obviously, we're all here to continue the conversations. We have one more panel before we break for lunch. So we'll be bringing them up right away. Thank you.